The exodus is on. As big and powerful Hurricane Bonnie moves in, people along the Carolina coast are moving out. A man who was once the world's most feared terrorist is reported in custody in Egypt. The ruble resumes its plunge. Could it bring down Boris Yeltsin? And eye-opening research tonight on a cheap and simple way to cut your risk of cataracts.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
Good evening. Dan is off tonight. I'm Ed Bradley. More than 500,000 people are under orders to leave the coast of the Carolinas for safer ground. Hurricane Bonnie is closing in. The center of the storm is now less than 300 miles offshore, moving in at 16 miles an hour. Bonnie could make landfall tomorrow. Most likely target somewhere in the Carolinas. But hurricane watches and warnings are up from Georgia to Delaware. A team of CBS News correspondents is in the hurricane zone. We begin with Jim Axelrod in Nags Head, North Carolina.
Nearly 250,000 people are clearing out of Dare County, North Carolina tonight.
Well, we're going to turn our keys in.
Creating a somber procession on US 158. For most of them, vacation is over.
I came down here to go fishing for a week, and here I'm going back home.
We've been coming down here 30 years, we've been through many storms. This is the first time we've got thrown out.
Dare County requested at 6 o'clock this morning that everybody evacuate. It was pretty much a volunteer evacuation. Now they'll be going to a mandatory evacuation.
No one here fools around when a hurricane is on the way. Not with memories of Hurricane Fran 2 summers back still so fresh. At $6 billion of damage, it was North Carolina's worst disaster ever.
Getting out of here, huh? Don't want to, but got to. Oh, so you're just going because they're telling you to? No, we're going because we're scared.
Scared but hopeful that in a couple of days, the long lines will be tourists anxious to return and get back to the business of relaxing.
That's our main industry down here. I mean, we are a tourist resort. So without the tourists, we close down.
The beach towns along this stretch of North Carolina coast are now nearly empty. Emergency management officials here in Dare County hope to have their evacuation wrapped up and everyone moved inland by midnight. Ed?
Thanks, Jim. Jim Axelrod in Nags Head. The Carolinas could be feeling hurricane force winds by dawn tomorrow. Let's go down the coast now to CBS News correspondent Byron Pitts, who's near Wilmington, North Carolina.
For businesses and homeowners along Wrightsville Beach, it has been a day of necessary precautions and unneeded reminders of hurricanes past, and now Bonnie.
We are rebuilding from Hurricane Fran 2 years ago, and we haven't even finished, and now here we have another one on the way. I'm getting ready to board it up and go to the movies.
This morning, beachgoers blinked at the threat of Bonnie. Now that she's staring back and inching closer, many along North Carolina's coast have packed, gassed up, and moved away.
Hate to even leave. The weather's beautiful. Sun's shining, nice breeze blowing. It's hard to believe it's going to be so bad in a day from now.
John Dreary believes.
Glass bends doing thing, and this adds a little strength to it. I don't know how much good it does, but it makes you feel better.
At age 66, he's built a business and raised a family on Wrightsville Beach. But he will ride out Bonnie in nearby Wilmington.
So you've been here 37 years. Does Bonnie scare you at all?
I had a dog named Bonnie, and she was mean as a damn snake, so I don't know what this will do.
Tonight, Wrightsville Beach, like much of the Carolina coast, is now under a mandatory evacuation. By 11 o'clock this evening, police here say any stragglers left will have 2 options: get out or go to jail. Ed?
Thanks, Byron. Byron Pitts in Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina. Bonnie has made the surf dangerous all along the East Coast, with swimming banned as far north as Long Island, New York. In the coastal area closest to the hurricane, waves are running as high as 14 feet. CBS's Diana Olick in Virginia Beach reports on the danger offshore.
The red flags are up all along Virginia Beach. But lifeguards were still flagging swimmers down, trying to steer them away from powerful rip currents caused by Hurricane Bonnie.
Got it dislocated on 8th Street.
It didn't take long for the first injury of the day.
This morning I felt the riptide for the first time.
Don Rommel thought he could take it.
I got tumbled in a wave and I tried to catch myself and dislocated my shoulder. And it's just so painful. Can't move.
It's deceiving because the rip current is under the water where you can't see it.
Virginia EMS specialist Ed Brazel says Bonnie is churning up the ocean bottom so badly that new riptides are forming in places his lifeguards don't expect.
And the storm comes in and it'll knock holes in these sandbars. So a swimmer can be swimming along nice and peacefully and get caught in this hidden river and pulled out to sea.
And that's a riptide.
That's a riptide.
Still, many here, surfers especially, are braving Bonnie's wild ride. And while the surfers are still going at it, they're not taking any chances at nearby Norfolk Naval Base, where the order has gone out for at least 60 large ships and smaller vessels with their thousands of crew members to head on out to sea. They intend to outrun this storm in order to protect the fleet. Ed?
Thanks, Diana. Diana Olick in Virginia Beach. At the CBS News Hurricane Center in Miami, WFOR TV meteorologist and CBS News consultant Brian Norcross is tracking the storm. I asked him what Bonnie is likely to do next.
Take a look at the satellite picture. We can really pick out the center of this storm now, and you can see that it kind of headed to the northwest for a while, but if you watch closely, in the last couple of pictures it came up. Now it's made a more of a northerly turn. So right now it's back on track, it looks like, for the eastern end here of North Carolina. And just to show you how big this system is, this is the radar now coming out of the Cape Hatteras area. This is the beginning of it all, so it's not very far offshore. This is such a big, big storm.
When can we expect landfall?
Well, it depends on what you mean by landfall. We'll start to see these squalls move in with winds of maybe 40 or 50 miles per hour. That'll happen later this evening. And then by tomorrow morning, the hurricane force winds will move in probably near dawn. And then even later tomorrow morning, probably 11 o'clock to noon, that would be when the eye would come the closest to the coast, either over the coast of North Carolina or maybe just brushing Cape Hatteras.
Brian, thank you very much. NASA's high-flying hurricane hunters have now discovered some bizarre twists in Bonnie. It's carrying a baby hurricane on top, a chimney shooting out 70 miles north of the eye. What's more, it's snowing inside the funnel. Back down on the ground, this is the latest ground zero in Texas, left in the wake of Tropical Storm Charlie. The rain-swollen Rio Grande washed over the town of Eagle Pass overnight. Upriver in Del Rio, Texas, earlier flash flooding left at least 14 dead. Searchers say all the missing are now accounted for, about 30 people in all. Still to come on the CBS Evening News, how American taxpayers bail out homeowners in Hurricane Alley. A deadly bomb blast in an American restaurant in Africa. The first family goes sailing with an anchor. And science that could save your vision, preventing cataracts. Long before anyone heard of Osama bin Laden, the name Abu Nidal was a synonym for terror. The Abu Nidal organization was blamed for a string of ruthless shootings, bombings, and hijackings during the 1970s and 80s, including major attacks on the Rome and Vienna airports. Tonight, CBS News national security correspondent David Martin reports Abu Nidal is apparently under arrest.
Abu Nidal, once the world's most notorious terrorist, responsible among other crimes for machine gunning 5 Americans, including an 11-year-old girl, is said by U.S. officials to be in custody in Egypt. It's not clear what Egypt intends to do with him. In fact, the government there won't even admit it has him. But the career of the man whose organization mounted terrorist attacks that killed or injured nearly 900 people appears to be at an end.
I think it is fair to say that this man, who was really one of the great terrorists of the 70s and 80s, is pretty much out of business.
Former State Department official L. Paul Bremer spent much of the 1980s pursuing Nidal. But the closest he came to getting his man was to pressure Syria's President Assad into expelling him.
It seems that the expulsion from Syria accomplished what we wanted to accomplish, which was to disrupt him, to break up his infrastructure, to make it harder for him to conduct attacks.
He spent the past 10 years as a guest of Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. He continued to operate training camps in Lebanon, but never mounted any more terrorist spectaculars.
Abu Nidal is now in his 60s and in failing health and is believed to have crossed into Egypt seeking medical care. The Egyptian government will have to decide whether to turn him over to Italy, where he is wanted for murder. But most terrorism experts believe he will die a natural death before he is ever brought to justice. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
A bomb exploded at a crowded American-themed restaurant in South Africa today. At least one person was killed and dozens injured at the Planet Hollywood restaurant in Cape Town's popular waterfront district. A caller claiming to represent a Muslim group said it was revenge for U.S. missile attacks on Sudan and Afghanistan. But the head of the group later denied responsibility. A rebellion in the Congo has escalated into a full-scale regional war in Africa. Fighter planes from Angola and Zimbabwe bombed rebel forces holding the city of Kisangani today. Angola and Zimbabwe are backing the Congolese government of President Laurent Kabila, which blames the fighting on aggression by Rwanda and Uganda. In the CBS Market Watch, a survey out today finds Americans concerned about the impact of world financial and political turmoil on the U.S. economy. Consumer confidence in the economy is down for the second straight month, but it is still at the highest level in 19 years. One sign of that confidence, used homes were selling in July at the fastest pace on record. On Wall Street, the Dow closed up 36 points. New research in tomorrow's Journal of the AMA confirms for the first time there is a cheap and simple way to lower your risk of cataracts later in life. John Roberts shows you the easy way to have it made in the shade.
Harry McVicker began developing cataracts in the early 90s.
It would be like looking through a milky light bulb. I mean, you can see shapes and so forth, but you can't really see clearly.
His cataract surgery at New York Presbyterian Hospital was one of thousands performed each year.
If you look at the data, it's one of the most commonly performed surgeries in this country.
And it was one of thousands, this new study shows, that may have been due to occasional exposure to the sun, specifically ultraviolet B radiation.
People who maybe spend their lunch hour outside and then go to the beach for a couple of weeks, or people who maybe work outside in their garden.
Although previous studies of people who work outside have found an increase in cataracts, this was the first study done on the general population. It found the people who spent the most time in the sun were 60% more likely to develop cataracts than those who spent the least amount of time. Limiting the exposure and damage is as easy as wearing a hat and glasses.
When you go outside, wear a hat with a brim and wear some type of eyewear, either glasses or sunglasses. They're equally effective in absorbing and protecting against UVB exposure to the eye.
Researchers say the effects of UVB radiation on the eye are cumulative. That is, they are the effects of a lifetime, and that there really is no safe level of sun exposure. John Roberts, CBS News, New York.
On the Clinton family vacation today, President Clinton had no sunglasses on, but the First Lady did. They and daughter Chelsea joined Walter Cronkite for a ride on his ketch off Martha's Vineyard. Increasing his visibility in several ways, Mr. Clinton signed an executive order today creating a food safety council. He'll also make a speech Thursday in Waltham, Massachusetts. Subject, school safety. President Clinton talked by phone today with Boris Yeltsin, preparing for their summit in Moscow next week. The White House released this picture. Russia's economic crisis will top the summit agenda, a crisis that deepened today as the ruble lost another 10% of its value. As Anthony Mason reports, Russia's downward spiral has defied all the world's efforts to help.
The ruble is on the edge of collapse. President Yeltsin is clinging to power. Russia, the economists will tell you, is bankrupt and on the brink.
This is going to be a disaster.
International investor Jimmy Rogers is predicting
catastrophe. It's going to get worse.
So is Johns Hopkins economist Steve Hanke.
We are in a pre-revolutionary situation.
So where has all the money gone? The more than $100 billion that foreign banks and foreign governments have pumped in to prop up the Russian economy.
Most of that money is done on the Côte d'Azur. 35% of all the yachts in France now are owned by Russians.
In a word, stolen. Billions funneled through the Russian government and banks have been paid out to political cronies, disappearing into bank accounts in Cyprus, in Switzerland, and the south of France.
And now the debts are coming due, and somebody's got to pay them. And since they didn't build factories and didn't build highways and canals and railroads, there's no money to pay the bills.
$30 billion is owed to German banks alone. U.S. banks are less vulnerable, owed only about $6 billion.
Russia is a serious problem for the Russians and for German banks. It is not a problem for our domestic economy or our banks. We basically, my granddaughter does more business in her lemonade stand than we do export-import business with Russia.
But if the Russian economy crumbles completely and the country unravels, then it will be everyone's problem. Communism collapsed peacefully 9 years ago, but economists fear a Russian collapse could be explosive. Ed?
Thanks, Anthony. Retired U.S. Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell died today at home in Virginia. Appointed by President Nixon, Powell served for 15 years, often a swing vote in major cases, and fiercely independent on divisive national issues. He voted for affirmative action, abortion rights, and preserving the separation of church and state. He voted against gay rights. He resigned from 2 whites-only clubs in 1980. Perhaps his most telling opinion was in a letter he once wrote to his then teenage son. Powell said, "The really important thing is to do something worthwhile. This doesn't mean making headlines or the most money. Many who succeed in both of these are actually quite contemptible." Lewis Powell was 90 years old. Here in New York, word today that Emmy-winning actor E.G. Marshall has died at the age of 88. Marshall often played politicians and judges, but he was perhaps best known for his portrayal of a lawyer on the television drama series The Defenders. Coming up next, Eye on America.
The CBS Evening News and tonight's Eye on America segment are sponsored by Transitions Lenses. Right in any light and right for you.
Back to the Clinton story, please. Rick, can you put up Clinton?
In tonight's Eye on America, should the U.S. taxpayer help insure homes built in areas at high hurricane risk? As Hurricane Bonnie moves in on the Carolinas, it could hit homes along this barrier island. Homes rebuilt with the help of U.S. taxpayer money after they were destroyed by earlier hurricanes. As CBS's Jeffrey Kaufman reports tonight, it could happen again.
Those kids are playing in what was the middle of the main road here on Topsail Island. Now, what's left of the asphalt is underwater, except at low tide. This is Hurricane Alley. Just 2 years ago, this island was hit with a 1-2 punch. First Hurricane Bertha, then Hurricane Fran. Hundreds of homes flooded and flattened. Because of batterings like this, Topsail Island is falling into the ocean.
What did Fran do to your place?
It totally destroyed my house.
Like so many here, Sandra Ledbetter, a local realtor, returned to find her home a wreck. But take a look at her place today.
The hurricane's not a good thing. We don't want any more, but it's not necessarily a bad thing either.
Now, why do you say that?
Because everything gets a facelift. Because everything looks better. Everything gets a renewal.
That renewal comes courtesy of the American taxpayers and FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It poured $55 million into the rebuilding of Topsail through emergency aid, loans, and a program called National Flood Insurance. Topsail has risen from the rubble, bigger and better than before.
Would you have bought here in the first place without the National Flood Insurance Program?
I probably would not have.
Would not have because of the risk of building on what isn't much more than a big sandbar, being eroded by relentless wind and waves. Geologist Stan Riggs has been studying these barrier islands for 34 years.
I think that the idea that we're subsidizing development on the highest hazard property that we have in the country is sort of ludicrous.
Yet within weeks of Hurricane Fran, National Flood Insurance was helping Topsail rebuild. It's a great deal for homeowners because it costs just a fraction of what private insurance would cost.
It is the American way for neighbors to help out neighbors when disaster strikes. And when it's a big disaster, for the federal government to help out too. But what about people who knowingly live in high-risk areas? Should the federal government bail them out again and again?
Because of a flood of recent claims, National Flood Insurance has had to borrow $520 million from the U.S. Treasury. The program is run by Ed Pastrick.
I think it's worked every bit the way it's intended to work.
Pastrick says the program doesn't have the power to stop people from building in risky areas, but it does force people to build safer, more hurricane-resistant homes if they want flood insurance.
If those structures are going to be built, then the best we can do is make sure they're built more safely.
But the safest house can't stand if the ground beneath it is washed away.
Take me back here 10 years from now, 20 years from now. What will I see if we're standing here?
You won't stand here. This will be ocean 10, 20 years from now.
If another hurricane came along in the next few years and knocked you out, would you rebuild again?
If I could, I would, yes.
Secure in the knowledge that when disaster strikes, federal flood insurance will restore that ocean view. For Eye on America, I'm Jeffrey Kaufman on Topsail Island, North Carolina.
That's the CBS Evening News. Stay with CBS News and this CBS station for the latest on Hurricane Bonnie. For Dan Rather, I'm Ed Bradley. Good night.